From inside the castle in Owings Mills, Maryland, it is the Banner Ravens podcast. Paul Mancano, the man with the worst posture on planet Earth, Jonas Shaffer, leaning back into his chair, reclining.
It's recumbent. I don't know what you want me to do about it.
Recumbent. Wow. Can we make that the word of the day?
No.
Does recumbent just
I'm
mean
not going to do your homework for
prone
you, Paul.
to reclining?
I'm not going to do your homework for you, Paul.
I am going to have a
your own
word
homework.
of the day today. That's right. I took it back, Jonas, because you weren't doing enough words of the day. And I went and I saw a review that said they liked the word of the day. And I'm going to take it from you. It's no longer yours. You no longer have ownership of it.
Okay.
We're also going to talk about what we've seen so far at Ravens training camp. Jonas, you're going to hand out some medals, i.e. the Olympics.
Very good.
Thank you. That thing that's going on in Paris right now. You're going to hand out some medals, gold, silver, and bronze from guys that we've seen at training camp so far. We're just 1 week away. Just 1 week away from the first preseason game between the Ravens and the Eagles at M&T Bank Stadium.
Can't wait to watch Lamar Jackson not play.
Yeah. Did you watch any of that Hall of Fame game last night?
I did not.
Yeah,
I saw one kickoff, and it looked pretty much like most of the kickoffs from last year, aside from how they actually lined up.
Yeah, exactly. That's really all you need to stay there for. All right, Jonas, let me give you my word of the day, because now this is my segment. I'll let you take it back occasionally when you want it, but for now, ball's in my court. You know what my word of the day is, Jonas?
Don't say it, Paul.
It's Wick, because we were talking about how these shirts, mine doesn't, yours does, wick moisture, and on these hot days here at the castle, you need a shirt that wicks moisture.
Breathable.
The language of origin is Middle English, akin to Old High German, classic. It means to absorb or draw off liquid, in parentheses, by capillary action. That raised the question, what the heck does capillary mean? Well, Jonas, capillary is a tube that has an internal diameter of hair-like thinness. Does this mean that shirts that wick moisture have tiny tubes in them that expel moisture?
I think so. We should go to Under Armour. That they have some wicking shirts. We should ask them to see the thickness of their shirts.
You would have to go on a microscopic level almost.
I have my grandpa had one of those things used to
magnifying
glass. we can get all up in their business.
All right. Yeah, it's hot out here. That's my point.
It rained like one of the first days of camp, and I was wearing a shirt like this, and it was such a good wicker that it was like I was barely rained upon. It was great. Meanwhile, other people wearing, cloth polos were drowning in it.
Yeah.
Fools.
That's me today.
Yeah.
I look like a fool. We were having a conversation with Gianna Hahn about...
Oh, Paul, you always look like a fool.
Thanks. I don't need a moisture unwicking material to look like a fool. We were talking with Gianna Hahn about how sweat stains are hard to avoid.
I worry that if you say wick like 5 more times, you will run afoul of semantic satiation.
Quick.
You know what that is?
What? Semantic is... What is it?
Semantic satiation is like when you say a word so many times that you kind of lose all sense of like either how to pronounce it or what it means.
Satiation. Yeah. Because we're saturated with it.
Yeah.
There's our word of the day for next week.
Very clever.
Right. Let's talk about what we've seen so far from the Ravens here at training camp. I'm pretty sure we've already lost some viewers. If you're watching live on Facebook, YouTube, or Twitter, please give us a like, a thumbs up. If you're listening to us after the fact, would very much appreciate a review, a 5-star review. And if you want to throw your own word of the day in there, I'd appreciate that too. Do some of my work for me. All right, Jonas, your idea for this was not only the Olympics, but it was also inspired by a Simpsons episode, because you and I are both Simpsons fans, when they tried to get the Olympics to come to Springfield. And the Olympic Committee, as depicted in the show, was, of course, explaining the purpose of the Olympics, which is...
I thought you were going to do the quote.
No, I'm teeing you up for it. Did you write down the whole quote?
Yeah, but I thought you were going to introduce it. Okay. Here we go. You're forgetting what the games or what the Olympics are all about. Giving out medals of beautiful gold, so silver, and shameful bronze, but in a much more funnier foreign accent, right?
Yes, yeah.
Much more European accent. So
can we do gold, frankincense, and myrrh for this as well?
I don't know what that is.
The 3 gifts that the wise men brought to Jesus? Catholic school.
Yeah,
all right.
Not Catholic school, public school. Public school.
All right.
And so I thought that would be a funny, useful framing device for the true buttes of training camp, the guys who are having some ups and downs in training camp, and then no one is having a shameful training camp, we should say. Certainly no one that we're going to talk about. But guys who were a little bit worried about, guys who maybe start to wave the red flag for in 2 weeks here we are into training camp.
And my question is, having watched the Olympics, you have an event like a swimming event with 8 members. You only give out 3 medals. Does that mean that all the ones that we're not mentioning on this podcast are worse than the bronze because they didn't even medal, or they're just not noteworthy?
Yeah, this is a weird Olympic sport where everyone except the top 3 is disqualified.
Okay, that's I'm aware of fencing. I've seen it.
Oh my god, what an awful sport! Except when the U.S. wins, then it's fine.
All right, who is your first gold, Jonas, that you think has really stood out and been particularly shiny at training camp?
This is not just because I wrote about him and he has done nothing but confirm my priors, but I'm going to give it to Marlon Humphrey. He's been a standout basically since camp. I think we're a little bit worried about where he would be physically after he straight up did not show up, or not. He didn't show up. He didn't participate at all beyond like 1 or 2 periods in mandatory minicamp. I went back and looked at his film, thought, hey, this guy's actually a pretty good player. And what he's done in camp is pick guys off. He's run with really, really fast receivers down the field, which I think has been a critique of him from some people here in the Baltimore media, that he doesn't really have that, ability to spread those legs or extend those legs and just run with guys. He's run with Rashad Bateman. He's run with Zay Flowers. He's run with Devontae Walker, and not just like a half step behind, but step for step, to the point where the quarterback has no other opportunity but to just throw the ball downfield, ahead of those guys, so that Marlon can't make a play. So he's made picks. He's forced turnovers. That's something that he didn't do last year. I think he had just the 1 takeaway total. So I think he's been arguably the best player at Ravens training camp so far, which is a great sign, considering not just the money that they have invested in him, but how important this secondary is going to be for this defense's chances of repeating as like the top defense in the NFL.
Yeah, this is an important season for him to beat the washed allegations, which were heaved upon him probably way too early, way prematurely. I know he missed a lot of time last year, played parts of 10 games last year, and struggled, especially when he came back from injury. However, it really wasn't that long ago. This guy was one of the best cornerbacks in the league, was a Pro Bowl cornerback.
Still a top 10 cornerback on Madden, which is all that matters.
That's really the only thing that we're looking at here. He's entering his age 28 season, just turned 28. We've seen how teams shy away from paying these guys once they hit 29, 30 years old. You mentioned the money that they have invested in him. He is being paid under contract through 2026, but I think the Ravens could get out from under that after the 2025 season and really only incur $5 million of dead cap money for 2026. So really, he's locked in for the next 2 seasons of this Ravens team. And Brandon Stephens, who played like one of the best cornerbacks on the team, certainly, and one of the better quarterbacks in the NFL last year, is entering the final year of his contract. He's a younger guy. He's 26. And the question is going to be, now that you have a first-round pick and Nate Wiggins in there, you have TJ Tampa, who we still really haven't seen, but a 4th-round pick, so the Ravens invested something in him. They brought back Arthur Mollett for just 1 year. But you do wonder if the Ravens, if Marlon Humphrey goes out there and balls again like we've seen him do in the past, the Ravens going to say, you know what? We're okay with Marlon Humphrey and Brandon Stephens we're okay with Marlon Humphrey and Nate Wiggins. We're going to let Brandon Stephens test free agency.
Yeah, and if he gets a big deal, which he probably would, if he leaves after a good year, then that's a 4th-round pick coming back their way. Not until I guess it would be not next year, but 2026. But that's how they do business. That's how they did business with a lot of really good outside linebackers when they had a nice factory of those guys, those homegrown guys coming and then leaving. That just, how it's going to work. I mean, you didn't even mention Jalen Armour-Davis, who I talked to after practice today for not a football story, but, John Harbaugh after practice called him, a starter level performer in camp right now. And, you see him go out and make these athletic plays. He had a play yesterday where he's defending Sean Ryan, who's obviously, a guy or wide receiver on the training camp bubble, but runs with him step for step down the left sideline, almost makes a Odell-like catch for an interception. He looks good physically. He's telling me he's feeling a lot better mentally. It's going to be tough to keep him on the field, but if there's a secondary in the NFL that can do it, it's this Ravens one.
Yeah. Jalen Armour-Davis is another guy who gets one of your golds because of how good he has been. The question is how can he play him? You know, where
guys got hurt. That's the
yeah.
simple Occam's razor answer. I mean, he started camp by basically having like 1 or 2 pass defenses a day, a practice, and there was a slight dip in productivity, I guess you could say, when the Pats came on, but he was running with Rashad Bateman yesterday. He has made great plays on the ball. He uh, had the interception going up on a end zone fade against Mark Andrews for a pick on that day where just the Ravens could not stop throwing interceptions. And so he can run with shorter guys. He can box out bigger guys. The knock on him coming out of Alabama was he is this guy who is really athletically gifted. 6'1", 190, 4.4 speed. I think.
Yeah, like prototypical.
Right. Fits the mold, but he'd had some injury history coming in high school, hadn't really had a lot of reps at Alabama. There were some concerns about it, just his technique and his rawness, but this is obviously a coaching staff here in Baltimore that has really been able to hone some of these guys, turn Arthur Mullett into one of the best seasons of his career last year. Ronald Darby, made himself a lot of money last year in Baltimore. Obviously, the Ravens still have Jalen Armour-Davis under contract for not just this year, but next year. But this is a really, really important year for him just to feel like he can contribute something to this Ravens franchise besides just special team snaps.
Yeah. 2 more guys that you had, these guys on offense who deserve your beautiful golds. That would be Isaiah Likely and Ronnie Stanley.
Let's go with Isaiah Likely first, just because we still don't know exactly. I'm not, I'm keeping track of as much of this Lamar Jackson stats as I can, but
you got a shout out on the Ravens Lounge podcast, by the way, for tracking all the stats.
It was said with some derision, which I fully embrace. I fully embrace. But like, one thing that I can't do is keep track of how many of these catches Isaiah Likely is making with Charlie Kolar on the field, or with Mark Andrews on the field, or with Patrick Ricard on the field.
You just need to step up your game, Jonah.
So it's, on the one hand, kind of facile to say, oh, if Mark Andrews is making all these catches and Isaiah Likely is making all these catches, just get them on the field together.
Sure.
Why won't there be an overlap? And, I did a story in this offseason. We've talked about on the podcast about how, yeah, there were some promising returns, but there were also some limitations to those formations where you don't really have as much oomph as a run blocking force. And I think that deficiency is probably going to be highlighted even more this year, because we don't know what this offensive line is going to be.
Right.
We don't know if this year's offensive line is going to be anywhere close to last year's offensive line. And if it's not, then can you really afford to have 2 guys who aren't, Nick Boyle in his prime level blockers, or even Josh Oliver in Baltimore level blockers? So that's a consideration. But, a couple days ago, Lamar completed like 18 passes, 19 passes, and I think 5 or 6 of them went to Isaiah Likely. He's been a popular target underneath. He's been able to beat Kyle Hamilton deep every once in a while, which is, saying something. He is just a guy who does things like a wide receiver, but at that bigger body, which I think gives some DBs trouble, because you don't really know, am I supposed to muscle this guy? Do I play off of him? He's just a really, really tough guy to handle as a matchup. And it's going to be really interesting to see how Todd Monken handles his snaps, because he really didn't play him all that often until Mark Andrews went down last year. And,
right.
There's probably going to be a period this year where maybe Isaiah Likely isn't playing as much as maybe he thinks, or some fans think. And then what are you going to do about that?
Yeah,
it's a really, really tough thing to handle, especially if, Nelson Aguilar kind of carries his weight as the wide receiver 3.
Yeah. It's too many mouths to feed at one position,
Exactly.
You could say, but you could say it's a good problem to have, but it's like in basketball, if you have 2 big men and you want to get them on the court at the same time, you get your best players out there, but you also have to sacrifice something.
Yeah.
And in this instance, you could be sacrificing some of your end line blocking.
Yeah. And I like the basketball comparison, because when you think of like a team going big and having it work, you think of like the Minnesota Timberwolves, Rudy Gobert, but also Karl Anthony Towns.
Sure.
And
they complement each other.
And it works because Karl Anthony Towns can shoot it from outside.
Right.
And I will say that the one kind of like the one thing to grasp onto when you're thinking about the functionality of Isaiah Likely with Mark Andrews is we've seen Mark Andrews line up as that X receiver. You don't really think about him being a guy who can fill that prototypical, 6'3", 220 speedster stretching the field. But he's had some good reps and some important catches where he's working isolated against a cornerback or a safety,
Right.
beating them. Just use that great strength, use that great route running ability, be a safety target for Lamar Jackson. And if he can do that again this year, he's looked completely healthy coming back from the ankle and everything he did last year, then that would free up, Todd Monken to use Isaiah Likely in the slot, which is he's probably, his optimal position. Unfortunately, it's also Mark Andrews' optimal position.
Right. And for a team that lacks a true X receiver, unless Devontae Walker breaks out, which, he's shown some good signs, but certainly opens the door for that. Why is Ronnie Stanley deserving of one of your beautiful golds?
He's probably it's probably like a little bit of a nicked up gold. It's a little bit
shine.
It's a little bit of an ersatz gold. I think just the fact that we haven't been talking about him being a disaster in training camp against some guys who you would think would be able to bother him, with Odafe Owe with the power, Kyle Van Noy with the old man game. That there were some shaky moments, I think, there when the pads weren't on, where you heard reports of like Odafe Owe getting into the backfield every other snap. But since the pads have come on, we haven't really had cause to write about how he's getting bull rushed, how he's not been able to anchor. And, you want to take guys at their word a little bit. But it was kind of easy to maybe roll your eyes a little bit when Ronnie said at minicamp that he was feeling as good this offseason as he had since 2020, when of course he got hurt. But to hear him say at training camp a couple days ago that he feels like he's playing better now than he did at any point last year, I think that's a really, really encouraging sign. And, obviously I'm not an offensive line expert, but the fact that things have been generally pretty stable at that left tackle position, no matter who he's been up against, I think that's a really big win for the Ravens. If he can carry over this form into the season and hopefully not get nicked up in week 1, which has obviously been a problem for him in previous seasons, then I think that is like, that's a moment as good as gold to have your one-time franchise left tackle be a guy who can be a potential really, really solid piece of this offensive line. Has a lot of shakiness to it.
Right. They need him to be very solid
desperately
because they only have 2 returning pieces.
Yeah.
And one of them should be solid, although, Tyler Linderbaum will miss a couple days, though they're not worried about it. A soft tissue thing, according to John Harbaugh. But they have him and they have Ronnie Stanley on that line that are returning. And then you got battles everywhere else. That doesn't mean that they won't get solid offensive line play, obviously, but they need Ronnie Stanley to be a big piece of the returning strength of that team. All right, your so-so Silvers, Jonas. Who starts this list?
I think Lamar, not because he hasn't been great. I mean, I wrote about it yesterday or 2 days ago that I think like
on the BaltimoreBanner.com, which I think you can subscribe $1 for 6 months.
There you go.
That's what they've told me.
His practice on Wednesday, I think it wasn't the full workload of a usual practice, because like half of it was half speed, half of it was walk through, but the other half was full speed. Good amount of 7-on-7, good amount of an 11-on-11. He missed like one throw, probably the most accurate pass that I've ever seen of a Lamar Jackson training camp practice. And I've seen them all as far as I can tell.
No sick days for you. Sick days for Lamar, not for you.
And that pass that he missed was off Isaiah Likely's hands. I think it was more Lamar's fault than Isaiah Likely, but just some of the familiar kind of bugaboos are recurring. You don't want to make too much of a big deal about it, because it is early August. You do have time to get on track with these guys, but some of the issues of throwing downfield, not really giving guys a chance to just win the ball. Yesterday was a really, really tough one for him, especially with some of these guys that were the next guy that we'll probably talk about.
Yeah.
Just not able to give a Rashad Bateman a chance to win downfield, not, giving him a chance to come back to the ball on an underthrown deep shot and, win a back shoulder throw. A little bit disappointing, because it's kind of what we've seen year after year.
Last year, yeah,
and what we saw the year before too. But I'm willing to give Lamar Jackson the grace, because of course he is the reigning MVP. This is the time for him to get on track with these guys. It's only so just because of some of those areas that we talked about are also what we're now talking about. It would be unreasonable to just snap your fingers and say, hey, all of this guy's weaknesses are going to be covered up in one offseason. It would also be just totally crazy to think that it would be fixed
Sure.
within a span of 1 week of practice with him having missed that first week. But it is kind of a guilty until proven innocent thing, just because we haven't really seen that ability to spray the ball downfield like a Russell Wilson in his prime, or like a Justin Herbert or whatever. I mean, it's not a big deal either, because Patrick Mahomes hasn't been a great downfield thrower for a couple of years now, and it hasn't hurt him in the least.
Sure. Why do you have the top 2 wide receivers on this team in this category, and Rashad Bateman and Zay Flowers?
Yeah, I wanted to kind of have a philosophical question with you about this. So with Rashad Bateman, we are in half the battle with him, and Lamar has been, he's on the field running good routes, but not getting targets.
Yeah.
Here yesterday was a day when he got like 5 or 6 targets from Lamar, more than any other receiver, only 1 completion. Is it more concerning that is happening, or that Zay Flowers is not getting a high volume of targets, just point blank in team drills, considering how high the hopes were for him, considering everything that he showed us last year, considering that he went through some of these familiar dry spells in training camp last year? There was a lot of hype for him in training camp last year, but a lot of that was like him dusting dudes on one-on-ones, especially in some of those joint practices where he made, Emmanuel Forbes, all those Commanders DVs just look silly. So I'm lumping those 2 guys together because there are some flashing yellow lights with both of them, but for kind of diametrically opposed reasons. And I just don't really know how to think about where they are in terms of their productivity.
You want Lamar to be able to trust Rashad Bateman more than he did last year. But at the same time, when Lamar did trust him oftentimes in big moments, that trust wasn't paid off, not necessarily because of Rashad, but because of a disconnect. It falls on both of them.
Yeah.
I'm not blaming Rashad. I'm not blaming Lamar. There was just a disconnect between the 2 of them. So I think you want to see him get targets, but you don't want to see him get targets for target's sake. Like, what does that accomplish? You want the best possible outcome. That being said, over the course of the season, you need to prove that this guy's a weapon so that teams know to defend him in the playoffs. I don't know. I don't know if is it better to have loved and lost than to have not loved at all, Jonas? Save
it for your day tonight, Paul.
these are questions that we will ponder for years.
Yeah, it's probably a little bit more of a sore spot for me now because of what we saw yesterday and even today. I mean, it was a very chill, relaxed day. Not a lot of live bullets for these guys. And the first 2 throws that Lamar misses, or 2 of the only throws that he missed, frankly, are a deep shot to Rashad Bateman down the left sideline where I think he had a step on, I don't know, Jalen Armour Davis or someone, and not really given a chance to go get it. We get into 7-on-7 red zone, I think it is. It's Rashad Bateman matched up against Nate Wiggins. He, has a great route stem, kind of works him for a speed out. He's wide open for a 7 or 8 yard catch, and Lamar again just misses him, and he throws it to him,
right?
But it's too far outside, and just Jesus, if in this kind of very relaxed setting of not being a as intense practice or an as long practice, these guys can't connect. When's it going to happen? I know that's totally an overreaction because we still have another month until the season kicks off, but it's just why do you have not as good a chemistry with Rashad Bateman as Sean Ryan, a guy who's on the training camp roster bubble? It's very, very vexing. And you see them getting together, talking, having a good time. Rashad loves Lamar. Lamar obviously is working to trust Bateman, but you do just kind of wonder, is there going to be a watershed moment, or is it going to be a season of small accumulating victories where it does feel like that connection from back in his rookie year, back in his second year, is finally reestablished?
What's your trust level with Roger Rosengarten at this point? Do you think he has the inside track now? We're a week away from the first preseason game. We're weeks away from the start of the regular season. Do you think he has the inside track for starting right tackle job?
I think he does have the inside track, but it's really, really tough with a guy like that to make any sprawling conclusions, any definite, takeaways.
How come?
Because you can watch him in one part of practice and be like, oh, he's doing some really nice things. He's doing what he has to do in the pass game. in the run game is obviously a little bit more of a concern just because he's not as physically strong as some of the right tackles
He
that
needs
they've
to
had
anchor
there.
better. Yeah.
Yeah, just get stronger in general. And then other periods, you will kind of peel away from the main pack and go watch the offensive line, defensive line one-on-ones. And the thing I've had a hard time kind of getting out of my head is him working in a one-on-one against Malik Harrison. Not who he is playing as an edge player by necessity, but not someone that you would consider to be a pass rushing threat on this Ravens team. And it's Rosengarten versus Malik Harrison. Malik Harrison kind of sets him up with an outside move, moves inside, wins with power. And it's just like, if in early August, Roger Rosengarten can't really win or even have a stalemate against Malik Harrison in these one-on-ones, how good should the Ravens feel about his chances of winning against George Karlaftis or, God forbid, Chris Jones if he's lined up outside in week one? So I don't know if the Ravens will kind of take the Orlando Brown Jr. approach from a couple years ago, where you give this guy time in practice to get his feet underneath him. Maybe there's an injury. Maybe there's some moment where you feel like, all right, we're going to finally give this guy a chance. Or do you just say, throw him out to the wolves and say, hey, it's sink or swim time, Roger. We took you with the second round pick. We feel confident in you. We feel confident in Lamar's ability to evade pressure or this running game with the ability to play action to kind of keep these guys from not being totally, gonzo in their pass rush stuff. It's just a situation where you can come away from one practice feeling really, really good, come away from another practice feeling really bad, or even one period to another. It's just, that's life in the NFL for these guys who are maybe not as physically developed as they would be a year from now. It's really tough to know where these guys are going to be 1 week from now, 1 month from now, one season from now.
I can't believe we haven't asked this on a podcast before, but do you think one of Roger Rosengarten's ancestors had a rose garden, and that's how he got his name?
It's probably in the etymology, right?
You would think. For another episode. You had another rookie as your so-so silver in Nate Wiggins before we get to our bronzes.
Yeah, Wiggins is probably the more obvious example of the highs and lows of being a very talented guy. Like, you'll see him come up with some interceptions. You see him like ripping the ball away from, I think, Sean Ryan a week ago and basically like bringing it back for a pick six. You see him, get his hands on a lot of balls, but then also you watch one-on-ones or you watch him, maybe lining up with the twos or the threes and for some of these team drills and defense stuff. It's like, how much can we trust a guy who is getting beat by, Keith Kirkwood or Sean Ryan, these guys who aren't household names, not in the NFL, but Baltimore.
Yeah, even amongst the Ravens fans.
And he is so talented, so skilled, but we've talked about just how tight a leash the Ravens have with rotating guys at cornerback. Is he going to be a guy who's used situationally? Is he going to be a guy who you throw out there for possession one of Ravens Chiefs? Like, you just wonder how much margin for error does a guy like that have? Or do you have to put him in certain situations? Maybe, that works to the Ravens' advantage where, because defenses really haven't figured out what he's good at or what, where he's strong at, where he's weak at, you can maybe have a little bit more latitude that way. Like, we know that he bites on double moves or something. Then that's something that we have an advantage of against the Chiefs. But he's super talented, super athletic, and yet you still see him being run by some of these receivers. And I just wonder how that is going to affect how the Ravens want to use him early in the season. I think he's super talented. He could have a starting job by the end of the year. But if he's having some of these boom bust moments in practice, in 11-11 drills, you don't really see that as often with Marlon, with Brandon Stevens, Arthur Mollett. How is that going to affect, how these kind of Ravens coaches feel about where he stands in the depth chart and the playing time responsibilities in general?
And we've talked about it before, but you open the season facing the best quarterback in the NFL, and then
and maybe feel like you need his speed on the field too. I mean,
right.
With I know you shared with me, and I retweeted the clip of Xavier Worthy just getting stuffed into a locker there. But
that was hilarious.
That there's no, I think Jeff Zrebiec from the Athletic reported that like the rep that Nate Wiggins had a week ago or so, where he caught up to Nelson Aguilar in the open field. These guys are wearing these catapult GPS tracking things, and Nate Wiggins had like the highest recorded GPS in franchise history. So
That's crazy.
He's probably going to need that speed when it's Hollywood Brown and Xavier Worthy on the field together.
Right. And then you're talking about, facing the Raiders, obviously not great quarterback situation, but you have Devontae Adams is still there. Marlon Humphrey will probably take the bulk of that, but we know the Ravens mix and match there. And then you're talking about facing Dak Prescott and then Josh Allen. So, and then Joe Burrow in week 5. So we're talking about 4 elite quarterbacks in the first 5 weeks of the season. So that's not the time where you really want to have a rookie out there struggling. All right. Finally, Jonas, bronzes. You have 2 guys in this category. Who do you have and why?
Yeah, I have David Ojabo with this one. All the credit in the world goes to him for being so far ahead of his recovery. He tore his ACL, like 10 months ago? It was not long that his 2023 season,
it's about 10 months ago, right?
was lost, and he was back on the field. The John Harbaugh told us in OTAs that he probably wouldn't be cleared to practice until midway through training camp, and there he was playing in team drills on day 1. So all the credit in the world to him and his medical staff and to the Ravens, athletic trainers for getting him up to speed. But you just haven't seen those flashes of athleticism that made him such an intriguing prospect coming out of Michigan, or even getting that incredible jump off the line of scrimmage that he did as a rookie, or even last year. And there was a play that stuck out to me yesterday that kind of gave me the ick. And I know I'm not cool enough or young enough to say it, but I can't think of a better expression of my sentiments about kind of where he is in his way back. On his way back to potentially be an impact player for this defense, where he's lined up with the I guess the starting defense. It doesn't really matter, but it's a play action drop back, so he's matched up with a tight end, and that tight end is Kadir Ishmael, who is a converted wide receiver who last year was playing for Division 2 or Division 3. I think maybe Monmouth. It's on the roster here, but not a guy who has experience with having his hand in the sand or blocking guys who were as well regarded and as athletic as David Ojabo, and he just didn't really have a clue about how to beat him. And it was just like, if David Ojabo can't beat, and again, this is hypocritical of me because I hate the whole aggregator instinct to overreact to one play, but I do think there are certain takeaways from things like that. And if David Ojabo doesn't have the athletic skill set at this point in his rehab, and I think that should be the point that's underlined here, at this point in his rehab, to beat a guy who is a converted tight end who does not have a lot of sand in his pants to kind of handle some of these athletic, powerful edge rushers, then how should we kind of calibrate our expectations for David Ojabo to make an impact early in this year? I mean, frankly, I've been more impressed by his ability to kind of set the edge as a run defender than I have as a pass rusher.
Well, and that moment didn't just fall out of a coconut tree. It exists in the context of everything else, which is him struggling last year and him not looking great at times. If we had seen more flashes, if we had seen more consistent
that preseason
play,
game against the Commanders just sticks out to me like a sore thumb. He just didn't do anything.
Right. You at this point need evidence. The guilty until proven innocent thing. You need evidence to convince you otherwise, because it's just another drop in the pond of his struggles. And then why did you have Ben Cleveland in here?
This was working under the assumption that he might not be here today. He left practice yesterday after getting whacked in the head. That obviously cleared him to return, so not really dealing with concussion, but just the starting right job is there for you to take, dude. At this point last year, at this point 6 months ago, we didn't think Daniel Faalele would even be in the mix at guard.
Yeah, we were still viewing him as a tackle,
because I think the Ravens were too. And the fact that job is there for you to be, that job is there to be won by a guy who has starting experience, who has good tape. Just get your head where it needs to be. Figure out a way to get your body right, your head right. Get on the same page as Joe D. The Ravens desperately need that position to be solid, because otherwise it's going to be Chris Jones putting Daniel Faalele in hell for all 4 quarters.
Yeah.
And we don't even know if Daniel Faalele can play all 4 quarters. I mean, his condition has been such a worrying point, I think, for the Ravens this year, that he's not been able to make it through some of the heat and sunshine. Granted, it's probably going to be much less adverse conditions. In Arrowhead in early September with a cool night's breeze possibly going through Daniel Falele's hair, but still, if you can't make it through 5 out of every 6 training camp practices here in Baltimore, then I do wonder about your capacity to just withstand all the mental and physical rigors that await you over the course of a 16, 17 game season.
There may be no better example of the difference in mentality between baseball and football than the fact that in spring training, they schedule all their workouts in Florida for 8:30 in the morning to avoid the heat of the day. And here at training camp for the Ravens, John Harbaugh is loving that it is scorching hot because it is testing his guys. It is, it is a toughness test.
And there was a point not too long ago where these practices were a lot more physical. I mean, John Harbaugh comes off the Andy Reid tree, and the Andy Reid tree is we're going to beat these guys up in training camp so that they are battle tested.
Yep.
And, I think John Harbaugh wisely has kind of eased up on that.
But he's still one of the toughest in the league in terms of practices.
Yeah. These are 5 practices in a row. And guess what? They're going again tomorrow for day 6. So maybe that is finally going to make a right guard out of Ben Cleveland. Maybe it's going to make a right guard out of Daniel Falele. Maybe it's going to make a right guard out of Josh Jones or Sala. But the Ravens, I think it's fair to say that Andrew Voorhees is, until shown otherwise, clearly the favorite to start at left guard. So that's 3 of 5 positions that are going to be, I think, sewn up by mid-August. But you are really playing with fire there on that right side because you don't have an idea about what's going to happen there.
That's what we saw coming a ways away, and I'm not going to say it's going to come to fruition because we're weeks away, but
we will be having the Morgan Moses discussion at some point.
We will, because this has been barreling their way like a freight train, and we've been clocking it at every stop. One more thing we should talk about is the unfortunate injury to linebacker Malik Ham, torn ACL. He is out for the season. A bummer for a guy that we were expecting for him to see more of the field this season, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I think we had him making the team, probably the last linebacker to make the team. And obviously the big variable in all this is Adisa Isaac. John Harbaugh keeps on saying that they expect him to be back, but it's been a hamstring injury. That's been a bit of a nagging thing that just because he's back doesn't mean that he's going to be back for long. You know what I mean? And if he's sidelined and Malik Ham's done for the year, and God forbid, Kyle Van Noy has a neck thing, or Adafe Owe rolls an ankle, because then you're really kind of down and probably needing to bring in a guy off the street. And there's not a lot of guys off the street that you would want to sign to this team. But Malik Ham, great guy at Baltimore's own. John Harbaugh was right when he was saying about how he was really starting to come on. I mean, I think literally maybe half an hour before that one-on-one where he kind of, moved his ankle in a way that it shouldn't have, he was beating Josh Jones cleanly for a sack with his kind of patented spin move. That was such a fun watch for me personally last year, just to see a guy who was as spring-loaded as he was, coming from that small school, being able to make it in Baltimore, just couldn't find a way to stay healthy last year, and fortunately couldn't find a way to stay healthy this year. So it's going to be an uphill battle for him. But obviously here he is in year 2 in Baltimore, having made it onto the training camp field both times. So you just hope that, this is a clean break. Like John Harbaugh said, it's a relatively straightforward ACL, and maybe that gives him some more time to, get stronger in other areas and just find a way to potentially make an impact in Baltimore at some point down the road.
Yeah. All right, Jonas, are we going to have one more episode before the preseason opener next week?
It's a good point, because I was so out of depth with my preseason schedule knowledge that I was telling people that the game was next Thursday, when in fact it is next Friday.
It's Friday night. Yeah, come on.
I don't know. We'll see.
We shall see. We'll at least have one after that.
Yeah, definitely.
We have had an interesting training camp so far, but not nearly as interesting as some other teams. I'm looking at the television behind you, Jonas. This is the best part about being in this room. And they have NFL Network on, where they have training camps from around the country. And they were on the Falcons earlier, and the camera guy just went from Kirk Cousins to Michael Penix to Kirk Cousins to Michael Penix. They just told him keep panning back and forth. So not as interesting as that. But we've seen some interesting storylines play out so far, and we will get more information in the coming week, and especially in that preseason opener against the Eagles. Please rate, review, subscribe, all that good stuff for the Banner Ravens podcast. Really appreciate you guys listening. If you write us a good review, I'll read it out here on the show. And of course, subscribe to the Baltimore Banner, $1 for 6 months. At Jonas_Shaffer is his Twitter handle. I'm at Paul Mancano and at All Banner